Welcome home to USA Global TV and Radio, a place where dreams take flight with authentic storytelling, diverse perspectives and meaningful conversations, where global stories unite and bridges are built beyond all borders. Discover world-class education, entertainment, hope and inspiration. Together, we're building bridges worldwide. Subscribe to our channel, USA Global TV. Download our app, USA Global TV. Be our guest or join our team. Visit usaglobaltv.com. Thanks to our founder and executive producer, Dr. Jacqueline Kerbeck. Music score by Yeffy Tang from Cloud Road Music. Voiceover artist Mike Porter. Creative direction by Paul Garcia. USA Global TV and Radio, your home for global connection. All rights reserved. This video and its contents are the exclusive property of USA Global TV and Radio. Unauthorized use, duplication or redistribution in any form is strictly prohibited.
Hello and welcome to the Persistence Payoff Show. We're here today on USA Global TV and Radio. I'm your host, Kimberly SCHAFER. I'm a first-time inventor and entrepreneur. I'm the inventor of the ring thing, which is a waterproof padded ring holder that I invented. I'm on my own journey of persistence with this endeavor, and I'm learning every single day, and I'm loving it. This show is focused on that quality of persistence and how it shows up for each of us. People can embody that in their personal lives and in their professional lives, and it also can show up in our internal talk, how we speak to ourselves internally in our own minds, and also how we interact with others in pursuit of our dreams and our passions and our businesses. So I'm loving talking. They embody persistence in their own life. That brings me to our guest today, and I'm very excited to talk with him because I think he's going to have a different take on persistence than we've discussed so far. Our guest today is Greg Barnesdale. He's an author and a speaker. He's a certified financial planner, a licensed funeral director, a hospice volunteer, a death doula, and the author of the book, Do Not Ignore Your Mortality. And I think his take on both persistence and his own journey is going to be very, very interesting. So please welcome Greg Barnesdale.
Thank you for having me on as your guest, Kim. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm just really grateful that you're here and looking forward to talking with you.
Yes, well, thank you. I think I have a compelling message that your audience will appreciate and hopefully resonate with. It's something that we all have to deal with.
Yes, I agree. And you know, the topic of death, particularly our own death, is often very uncomfortable in our Western culture. So I'm wondering, as we start on this conversation, do you have any words of introduction that you have found work to put people at ease as they think about their own death and talk about it?
Well, this might be a good time for me to read a short passage from the beginning of my book that you had just mentioned. I created it as a compelling introduction based on what my publishing coach had recommended, and I think it really sums up the core reason why I had written this book. But here it is. To all the dead people I have met over my career, I am sure many of you did not have your affairs in order. The endless stories I have heard and overheard from your grieving relatives and friends clarify that many sour situations like yours could have been avoided. This has pushed me to the point of taking this bold stand. My commitment to all of you is to inspire many others to have their affairs organized. We both know the lingering regrets of not being prepared lasts an awfully long time.
Yeah, that's very powerful. Thank you for that. That's very powerfully put. I'm interested in your own journey. So you started at a very young age with an interest in death and dying, and I believe you became a licensed funeral director at the age of 21. And so I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about your background and what led you to be interested in this area.
Well, none of my family were involved in the funeral industry, Kim. It was actually a high school guidance counselor that had suggested that I consider becoming a funeral director. My first choice prior to that was actually to become a helicopter pilot, but that didn't play out in my favor. So I ended up choosing the alternate plan to become a funeral director, and I very much enjoyed it. I've worked for large and small funeral homes over my career. During that initial period, I worked within the funeral industry for about 13 or 14 years, and I saw a theme reveal itself rather quickly. And the theme was that those families that were prepared and knew what they were to do at the time of a death were in a far better place emotionally and such, as opposed to the majority of situations where there was really no planning. And we saw this theme play out many, many times, as it still does today.
Yeah. You know, I've had some experience with that personally. My mother died of ovarian cancer, and she was very clear with my sister and I, who were her trustees, about her wishes, and she would write it out for us very, very clearly, and that helped so much, because at the time you're overcome with grief. It's just a wrenching time to lose someone, and to have that clarity and that path forward was incredibly helpful for us. So I absolutely see the benefit of your work and what you're doing.
Yes, well, thank you. I think it's a compelling message, Kim, that more people should hear, and more importantly, lean into while minds are clear and time is plentiful. But I saw a similar type of situation play out when I left the funeral industry after about 13 or 14 years and joined the financial planning industry. I told all of my clients about my background and what I used to work at as a funeral director, but I found rather quickly that a fair number of people were still uncomfortable talking about these sorts of things that could derail a good retirement.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I'm curious to know your take on why this is a difficult conversation for us, especially in the West. Like, there are cultures, for example, Buddhism, death is talked about a lot and planned for, and people actually think about what that process is of dying. And so it's not an uncomfortable topic for them. But for us in the West, it's a very uncomfortable topic for many people. And I'm curious to know why you think that's the case.
I think it's relates to a number of reasons, Kim. I think I know and I respect and understand the fact that it's a very difficult conversation and topic to discuss with those that we care about, because thinking about our death and our ultimate demise and no longer being here is very difficult. But we are much better off to lean into these conversations and plan accordingly while we have the opportunity to do so. But I think many people generally are just overwhelmed by the topic. Depending on the situation, it can be very complex. It can also be a factor of superstition. Many people feel that talking about these things will bring death on sooner, which in my opinion is not true at all. As Gail Rubin from New Mexico says, talking about sex will not make anyone pregnant, and talking about death will not make anyone die.
I love that. That's a great analogy. I love that. And so when we think about persistence, and you as a financial planner and as a funeral director, when you have these conversations with people, I imagine that there are some people that you have to be persistent in the conversation with, but I think that you probably have to couch it very carefully so that you're not hammering at them, but you're continuing the conversation. And I'm just wondering, what have you found are effective ways to navigate that conversation?
The conversations are often challenging, no doubt. But what I have done since I published this book, Kim, is I have come up with what I call the Living Legacy Quiz. And it's a very short 5-question quiz that's available for anyone to download or take the quiz from my website, donotignoreyourmortality.com. And anyone taking this short quiz, most people actually taking it, will realize rather quickly that they likely have some homework to do.
What a great idea, and how convenient and really helpful to make it short so it's not overwhelming to people, because the topic is overwhelming to people. That's a great. I'm curious to know also, as you're helping people think about their own death or someone in their family, what I've also seen from my own experience and talking with other people, sometimes after a death, the families can become very fractured. So do you feel that sometimes this planning ahead of time can help avoid some of that family fracture after the time of death?
Absolutely. These types of deep conversations about life's meaning and our legacy and what we want to be remembered for, and the essence of why we're here, often relates deeply to the relationships that we have with those closest to us within our family, our children, etc. And I think these types of deep conversations tend to bring families together more than anything.
That's really helpful. And so in your book, do you also talk about how an individual can think about it themselves, but also how to relate to their family about it?
Yes. I've come up with a curated list of 15 probing legacy questions that can be used as conversation starters. Again, anyone can download these from my website, donotignoreyourmortality.com, free of charge and without obligation. But along with those 15 basic questions are an additional 15 advanced questions that anyone can use in more advanced types of conversations about this sort of estate planning. And I created this list to make it easier for people to really have meaningful conversations, to get these discussions going in a better way, so that they get moving with this planning and truly tie it back to what their values are and what is most meaningful to them.
Yeah. What a gift to all of us to have this book and to have that guide to help us, because it is a very challenging topic. Now, you've had your own brush with mortality. You were diagnosed with brain cancer, I believe, a couple of years ago. And I wonder if you, with whatever you're comfortable sharing about it, if you could tell us about how you received that diagnosis and what that was like for you.
Well, the initial diagnosis, Kim, of the brain tumor, which came 2 months after I published this book 2 years ago, was a big shock. My general physician didn't know if the tumor, which the MRI revealed due to a ringing in my one ear actually, was cancerous or not. I went home. I wasn't sure if I should tell my wife right away. I ended up telling her 3 days later. I recorded a brief video after I told her, when I was outside by myself, not knowing if I would share it with anyone. I have since shared it on social media, and that video went viral, and it's now been viewed over 1.7 million times.
Wow. That's amazing. It's so interesting that there are things that we think that perhaps we should keep to ourselves and not share, but it's so powerful to share, and you can see the impact that has on other people. And just you being authentic and sharing that experience, I'm sure surely helped other people. I think that's fantastic. And what was that like for you to have just published the book, and then 2 months later you get this diagnosis and you're not sure, what does the future hold for me? And so what was that like emotionally for you?
Well, it was difficult. It was very, very challenging. And as I said, Kim, it shocked me. I really didn't know what to think initially. But until I spoke to the ear, nose, and throat specialist, who then clarified that it was likely a non-cancerous tumor, which it ended up being, it was just a tumultuous time. But I can tell you from experience that it was so helpful knowing that I had my final affairs in order, and being a funeral director and a financial planner and a certified executor advisor. This is something I've had in place and continue to update and so on a regular basis. But as I wrote about in my book, it can be a huge burden if one doesn't have their final affairs in order, and then they have a health issue to deal with. Trying to scramble to get those affairs in order can be very, very difficult.
Yeah. Yes, I can completely understand that. And then also, because we never know when death will happen for us, there are people who die suddenly through an accident, or there's just no opportunity to plan. And so, I completely see the benefit of doing that planning in advance while we can, because we don't know what the future holds for any of us. So I would love to know, as you have published this book and you've talked with people and presented it, have there been any big surprises for you and how people have received it? And have you received any questions or feedback that really surprised you?
No, actually, I'm gaining a fair amount of support with this message. And the very core message of what I'm now promoting within my interviews and so on, Kim, is really this. And this is the most inspiring way that I can put this. But I'm stressing the fact that end-of-life planning helps reduce the stress of aging. It tends to leave survivors more financially and emotionally resilient. It tends to leave them in a place where they are more likely to get along and less likely to contest final wishes. It naturally results in more meaningful legacies. It tends to take immense pressure off the courts from otherwise having to deal with so many unorganized estates. It often helps charities who desperately need the money. And all these things cumulatively help bolster the economy. It's a massive win for everyone.
That's a great point. I had not thought about that impact on the economy, and it makes perfect sense. That had not occurred to me. But that's really makes really good sense. And I'd love to hear about your work as a death doula. First, can you tell us what is a death doula and how do you do that?
Well, a death doula is similar to a birth doula, although we're helping at the time of a death and leading up to that point. And working as a hospice volunteer and the other roles that I've worked in the past relating to death and end-of-life situations, I'm referring to myself as a death doula because I'm a helper at the point of death. I've helped in various roles, but I do believe anyone working and volunteering in a hospice and helping in that way is also a death doula.
Yeah, that makes really great sense. And it's such admirable work. Again, going back to my mother's experience with hospice, it was so powerful to me to see that their focus was not on making her better, it was on making her comfortable. So that took not only, pain medicine, but it took the shape of aromatherapy or, massage therapy, or really wonderful, nurturing things that they would do just to help her be comfortable at that time. And that was a very different focus. And I really appreciated that and admired it.
Yes, and there's such a need for people to help in this space of the hospice field. The mandate of hospice is that no one should die alone, and that is such a noble cause.
Yes, very much so. Very much so. So was there a time in your life, like when you were doing financial planning, were you ever not involved with either the funeral industry or helping people plan for their own death and doing their wills? Was there ever a time when you were just focused on other aspects of financial planning, or has this been a common thread throughout your whole life?
Well, for the most part, it has been, Kim. But when I initially started working as a financial planner and then ultimately at obtaining my certified financial planner designation, I was quite focused on retirement planning. But this whole aspect of what I used to work at as a funeral director and in speaking with clients about their situations and what they were going through with aging family members and so on, it kept coming back up into the back of my mind consistently about how I should take that past experience and somehow merge it with what I learned in the financial planning industry and create something that would truly help a lot of people. And that's why I'm so glad that I published this book. I just wish that I had have done it much sooner.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I feel like things always happen just at the right time. So this must have been the right time for you to do that. And whether it was for you personally or for the world to be open to it, I don't know. But I believe that things happen just when they're supposed to. So are you planning a follow-up? Is there a part 2 for this book?
There will be a second edition at some point, Kim, but I'm not sure exactly when. But I've written this book for both the Canadian and the American market, but it is also selling in other countries now too. The theme that I promote within this book is universal. It applies basically around the world, but it is meant as a brief conversation starter. It doesn't get into the weeds of estate planning strategies and so on, but it's meant to inspire people to pull out their will and read it. And if they don't have a will, to understand the implications and the problems that will likely exist by not having one.
Yeah, that makes really good sense. You always hear these horror stories of people who didn't have a will and then things go into probate and it's just a big mess for everybody. So how do you address people's financial concerns? Like, gosh, maybe a family is struggling financially and they don't have the funds to hire an estate planning attorney. Like, do you give different steps that people can do who may not be able to afford that, but they can still do some planning?
Yes, I do. And going into this, Kim, I knew and certainly appreciate the fact that not everyone can afford a lawyer and a financial advisor. And I intentionally wanted to be transparent, as I did about my brain tumor on all of my social media platforms and so on, that it is true that anyone can set up a will online these days for very little money. But there are cautions with that. If someone is paying any type of support to an ex-spouse or paying spousal support, they should be seeing a lawyer and not using an online will-making platform. If they own any part of a business or own any property outside of their jurisdiction or have any specific requests that they want within their will to take place after their death, they should certainly be seeing a lawyer too.
Yeah, that's great advice. That makes really good sense. And I'm curious because you're so knowledgeable and you have such a broad array of experiences. Are you thinking of also doing workshops or online training courses for people?
I have considered that, but I haven't moved in that direction as of yet. I'm primarily promoting this message as wide and far as I can. And by the way, Kim, I also wanted to mention that within this book, I think it's important for your listeners to also understand that aside from me just promoting the importance of a will, that's not the extent of it. Within this book, I also explain many of the fundamental aspects available within the funeral and the financial industry. I also talk about medical directives in the final chapter. And at the back of the book is a very extensive glossary that explains terms and definitions from both the funeral and the financial planning industries.
Wow. I'm so impressed by your work. Those areas of in the funeral industry and financial planning don't often overlap. And so I think it's a really unique perspective that you have and really important for people to learn and to think about. As you talk with people, are there people that you've come across who just are not interested in talking about their own death whatsoever? Like, have you run into any situations where you just were like, I'm not going to make any progress here right now?
Yes. I talk about one particular instance briefly within the book, Kim, and that has me thinking about the situation where I went to meet with a young fella who had a family about life insurance planning. And I remember him distinctly saying to me, Greg, I don't care what happens to me after I'm gone because I'll be dead. And I realized at that point that I really wasn't going to make any progress, regardless of him having a wife and young children in his picture. it just seemed to me that it would almost be impossible for me to convince him that he needs to be thinking more in line of the big gap within his family and the immense loss of him not being there. I think some people's minds are just made up, and trying to convince them otherwise would be very tough.
Yeah, that's, and that requires a great sensitivity. So I think, I would imagine that your work and experience as a funeral director has helped you have that sensitivity to really read people and figure out how to approach things, and maybe when to push forward and when to put the brakes on.
I think it has. I think it certainly helped me as a financial advisor coming to that field with my experience as a funeral director. And I believe that I'm still one of the few that has made that transition.
Yeah. Yes, I can imagine that. Which leads me to another question. As you're talking with individuals about their own planning for their death, do you also have programs or outreach to funeral home directors to help them perhaps become more educated about this so that they can help their clients in this area?
Well, my efforts on the LinkedIn platform are actually proving to be quite successful. That core message that I had mentioned, Kim, a few minutes ago about greater resiliency for survivors and their tendency to be more inclined to get along, and helping charities and more meaningful legacies and helping the economy, is something that I'm now actively promoting on LinkedIn as I strategically approach strangers from the fields who I think would resonate with this message, such as the medical, legal, and financial fields. And I will have over 10,000 followers by the end of this month. I'm quite confident of that.
Wow. That's so impressive. And I'm curious to know, before you wrote this book, did you have a social media presence, or is this something that you've just learned in the last 2 years since you published the book?
Yes, you're right. I've basically leaned into social media since the time I published the book. And this whole aspect of me, myself, being diagnosed with a large non-cancerous brain tumor and going through the surgery and the follow-up radiation just last week, actually, to control the remaining residual tumor that is growing again. It's just attracted a good amount of attention, and I'm grateful for that, because I think more people are now thinking about these things in their family.
Yes. Wow. That's incredibly impressive that over 2 years you'll have 10,000 followers on LinkedIn. That's really kudos to you. That's fantastic. Yeah. So as you look ahead, so you mentioned that your tumor is still growing. Is that something that they'll be able to treat again, perhaps with another surgery after it gets to a certain size, or how will that be addressed in the future?
Well, since the time of the surgery 2 years ago, when the neurosurgeon removed most of it, I have a 6-inch scar up the side of my head here as a reminder of that. But we knew going into this, and he had told me that the small portion wrapped around several facial nerves on my brainstem couldn't be removed. It would be too risky, because he wanted to make sure that I could still talk and blink and eat, and I was certainly game for that. So they've been monitoring the residual tumor with MRIs since, and the most recent one about 3 months ago revealed that it was growing again. So my next best option was radiation treatment, and I just went through 5 sessions of that last week.
Wow, amazing. Well, I'm glad that they're following you closely and that they have a good plan. That's got to be comforting. And are you traveling a lot as you're promoting the book, or are you doing most of it online?
Most of it is virtual, Kim, but I am open to traveling. I'm suggesting to anyone that wants to collaborate with me, I'm willing to be involved in webinars. I'm willing to come out and speak to groups, provide autographed copies of my book, or provide copies of my book virtually as well. And I've also created a chatbot recently that can help spread this message and do it in a co-branded fashion with organizations that are looking to elevate their message along with mine.
Wow. That's a very interesting point about corporations, because it seems to me that planning ahead and preparing for death and getting your financial affairs in order and creating a will is something that corporations could offer to their employees as a benefit. And I've never thought about this, so I'm asking a totally naive question. Is that something that corporations are involved with?
Yes, and as it relates, Kim, to mental health is a big issue, as we all know in our world today. But grief, as an example, is something that we all go through. And there are many instances where employees are suffering through bereavement and grief within their family, and then coming back to work after their prescribed few days off and finding it very difficult. I was involved recently on a LinkedIn Live webinar with a grief specialist by the name of Carol Bannons, and we were talking specifically about this particular topic.
Wow. That is so, it's true. I know I worked at a university here in San Diego for a long time, and there would be leave, you could have family and medical leave after someone dies, but that doesn't necessarily address the long-term grief that people go through. And that's a very important point. Does your book touch on that, like ways for people to deal with grief after a loved one dies?
No, this particular edition does not, Kim. But that's something that I could perhaps be incorporating into my message in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, it's such a deep topic. I could imagine there'd be so many angles to talk about. Yeah, and so over time, so you started in this field when you were 21, when you got your license as a funeral director, but then surely you had an interest in it before then that led to that moment. And so I'm just curious to know if your perspective about death has changed over time, and if so, what are some of those changes?
Well, I'm taking it more seriously now because I'm older, and having gone through a large brain tumor diagnosis, it has given me a perspective, Kim, that I guess is a little closer to the topic than many other people perhaps have had. But it's giving me, I think, a more rounded perspective towards what people go through.
Yeah, that makes really good sense. I can understand that. And I'm curious, as a more general question. So you had this idea for your book, and the passion to write the book, and the vision and the ability to write the book. Is there any advice you would give to someone in any field who's in the same situation, where they have a kernel of something in them that they would like to pursue and write about, and maybe it's not been done before and it's something new for them? Is there advice that you would give to them about how to go about it?
Relating to persistence, I assume, correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay. Well, yes, my wife would call me a very persistent person, and I'm grateful that I am persistent, and I have been persistent to get to this point. But I didn't think I would have to live through a brain tumor to experience the full spectrum approach to this either. But I would recommend to anyone, Kim, that if they have a strong desire to do something, it's so important to keep following through and not let anything derail them from that type of focus that they are focused on achieving, and to be persistent and to find people to help support them so that they can ultimately achieve their goals.
Yeah. I think those are great words of advice. I totally agree with that. And who were some of the people who helped you? Who were some of the people that you relied on when you were writing your book?
Well, one of my biggest mentors is David Chilton, and he changed the face of retirement planning a couple of decades ago. I'm sure you're familiar with Shark Tank in your country.
Mhm.
Well, my mentor, David Childen, was a dragon on Dragon's Den here in Canada for 3 seasons. And I followed his masterclass book writing and book publishing program and have followed it for the last 3 years. He has been a huge help to me.
Wow. Wow. What a great mentor to have. And I'm curious to know, once you started writing the book, how long did it take you to finish it?
I would guess, I don't know exactly, Kim, but I would guess that it took me a good solid couple of years to get it to the point of publishing it.
Mhm. Yeah. And did you have a habit? Like, would you write every day, or would you set aside a certain amount of time a week to work on it?
Yes, I would try to work on it every day. Although my wife wasn't keen on that, I would try to take weekends off. But yes, I would try to write as often as I could. And I also, taking my publishing coach's advice, I also recruited over 25 beta testers from my target market to provide me feedback as I created the manuscript.
Wow. That's impressive, because especially when you have a passion for something, it's not always easy to absorb feedback about it. So that I give you a lot of credit for being open to that, because probably there was some feedback that you weren't expecting, or maybe you didn't agree with entirely, but you were open to it. So really, kudos to you.
Yes, well, thank you. I did find it very, very helpful, because none of these people, Kim, were from the funeral or the financial industry or the legal industry for that matter, but they all wanted to share their experience and to be a part of this book and the message that ultimately can help other people avoid what many of them had witnessed.
Yeah. Yes. What a great effort. What a great team effort. Now we only have a few minutes left, and so I'd like to just ask a couple of wrap-up questions. And the first is, if someone is new to thinking about this, they've kind of just been avoiding thinking about writing their will, and they're not very comfortable with it. Once they buy your book and read it, are there a few first steps that you recommend that they take to really start moving forward with their own planning?
Yes. The first thing I would recommend is speaking with their family about what they want to have happen, whether they become incapacitated or upon their death. It is so vitally important that our closest family members know what we want, regardless of the size of our bank account. Our family, at a minimum, an absolute minimum, should know whether we want to be buried, cremated, recycled, or composted. And there are so many options these days as opposed to years ago. But I've seen many situations, Kim, where families had no idea what the deceased wanted done. And that seems like such a fundamental thing to know, especially upon the death of someone.
Yeah, that's excellent advice. Really excellent advice. And is your book available through Amazon or through your website, or how can people buy your book?
They can find my book pretty well anywhere, Kim. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple, iTunes, and it's also available in audiobook format too. But if people remember this website, donotignoreyourmortality.com, and navigate to the site, they will find all kinds of links to Amazon and Barnes & Noble, etc., to be able to buy the book through there, or by simply going directly to Amazon as well.
Okay, great. And then my last question for you is, if people want to connect with you directly, what is the best way for them to do that?
Through my website, donotignoreyourmortality.com is the best way to reach me.
Okay, super. All right. And if they want to watch your YouTube video, or your social media, like the video you mentioned has 1.7 million views, I think. Is there a link to that on the website?
Yes, there is. Yes, all those links are on my website. And I believe as a part of this podcast as well, my different social links will be included here as well.
All right, super. Well, Greg, thank you so much for being here today and for talking about this and for your work. I think this is incredibly important. It's not an easy topic, but it's something that will affect everybody. And I think you've done it beautifully. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Yeah, wow. What a incredible story, and really tackling a difficult topic. It's not an easy topic for most of us to think about. And I think that Greg has the experience and the insight to do it just powerfully and beautifully. I always end every show with a quote. And as usual, I don't know ahead of time exactly what that quote is going to be. But the quote for today is from Octavia Butler. And it says, first, forget inspiration. Habit is more dependable. Habit will sustain you whether you're inspired or not. Habit will help you finish and polish your stories. Inspiration won't. Habit is persistence in practice. And I think that Greg's story of trying to write every day and keep at it was a habit, and it paid off. And now he has his book, and he's going to be working on a second edition. So that's really fantastic. I would love to hear from you. You can connect with me in a couple of ways. The first is through my website. It's ringthing.com. You can also reach me by email. My email address is kimberly@ringthing.com. You can also leave comments on the show, and I will be happy to respond to them. Here's the Ring Thing website. It has information about the Ring Thing and also my contact information. We are here every other Tuesday on the Persistence Payoff Show, and I'd like to thank Dr. Jacqueline Kerbick, the founder and president of USA Global TV and Radio, and all of you for listening. So thank you so much. Bye-bye.
In a world that moves fast, there's strength in the woman who moves with grace. Introducing Bay London, where confidence meets craftsmanship. Each piece is intentionally designed for the woman who knows her worth, crafted from luxurious Italian eco-fabrics that feel as good as they look. With elegant coverage, effortless support, and timeless style, our swimwear celebrates both your body and your essence. Founded by fashion expert Carrie Sykes, Bay London is made for women who want to feel sexy, stylish, and seen. From poolside to beachside, sunrise to sunset, Bay London outfits you for every moment that matters. Because beauty isn't about age, it's how you wear your confidence. Bay London, confidence, elegance, effortless luxury. Visit baylondon.com. Act now for your exclusive friends and family discount of $35. Scan the QR code. Bay London, where confidence meets craftsmanship. Proud sponsor of USA Global TV and Radio.
USA Global TV and Radio, home of the YouTube Silver Creator Award, proudly presents Just the Thing for Your Ring, introducing the patented Ring Thing. Your premium personal ring holder to keep your ring safe, nearby, and avoid loss.
The Ring Thing just got smarter. Add your logo and an NFC tag that opens to your website with one tap. Waterproof, inner padding, and now a forever business card.
Just the thing for your ring. Scan the QR code seen here to learn more about Ring Thing or place your order. Follow Ring Thing on Instagram at ring_thing_ or go to our website ringthing.com.
Thank you, viewers and listeners of USA Global TV and Radio, for joining us today. We're honoured to have your time and attention as part of our global community. At USA Global TV and Radio, we believe in the power of authentic conversations, meaningful connections, and creating a world of possibilities together. Want to be part of something bigger? Join our team of elevated listeners at usaglobaltv.com, a space where your voice matters and your ability to listen transforms relationships. Stay connected with us across all our platforms for thought-provoking discussions, expert insights, and empowering stories. Subscribe to our channels at youtube.com/c/USA Global TV. Follow us on social media and explore the endless opportunities we're creating for growth, learning, and inspiration. Together, we're not just broadcasting, we're building bridges and changing lives one conversation at a time. For inquiries, contact us at info@usaglobaltv.com. Music by Johnny Dies. Produced by Executive Producer and Director Dr. Jacqueline Kerbeck. Voiceover by Mike Porter. Creative Direction by Paul Garcia. All rights reserved. Copyright 2025. Visit usaglobaltv.com to view our full terms and conditions.